If you've had any cryptid encounters you'd like me to share on here, email me at jttosstories@gmail.com. I live in southern Ohio, near the Ohio River. Myself and a few friends decided to go explore the abandoned hospital that backed up to a giant hill and large forest across the river in Maysville, Kentucky. It was a local spot for dumb teenagers to go and scare each other and play around with their girlfriends, so running into other people wasn't uncommon, but you could usually tell if other people were there because there'd be cars parked near it. That being said, on the night in question, we were the only dumb teenagers there. The moment we got out of the car, though, everything felt wrong. We knew we weren't allowed to be there because the building was condemned, but this time it felt like we were actually in danger, which, of course, we always were, because it was condemned, but it just felt different. Now, by this point, I had been to Hazelwood Hospital 20 times or so, and I was familiar with the layout. Once the three of us had gotten inside, we had been there about 45 minutes, when we split up to tag some different places and explore. I went to go take pictures of the morgue in the basement to see if I could photograph any orbs or anything really cool. I'd been in the morgue for about 10 minutes when I smelled the most foul smell I'd ever smelled. It was rot. I don't know what it was that was rotting. I imagine it was a large dog or a coyote, but all I could make out was about 40 pounds of rotting meat. I just started to look at the meat chunk when I heard the slam of a steel door. It sounded like running through puddles of water, which meant whatever it was in the basement with me, because the floor had about 3 inches of water standing in it. So, naturally, I figured it was my friends playing a prank on me. That was when I decided to get them back and scare them before they could scare me. Now, the way the morgue was set up, you could actually climb on top of the coolers they used to store the bodies. So I hopped up there and laid in wait to scare my friends. And I had been there no more than a minute when I heard screaming. Now, I've known my friends my entire life, which at this point had been 19 years. I've never heard screaming like this. The screaming stopped, and I heard hard footsteps running above me and what I can best describe as pounding. Now, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't freaked out a little, because this wasn't like my friends. It was usually hide behind a horn, hump out, and go, "Gotcha!" This was different. This was dread that I was starting to feel. As I continued to lay there, about 5 minutes passed when I heard panting and footsteps in the water. They were getting closer. That was when I smelled wet dog. But it wasn't just wet dog I was smelling. I was smelling that same smell of rot, too. Then another steel door slammed, and I could tell it was the same door I passed before I got to the morgue's door. The panting was even louder now, and honestly, it sounded more like labored breathing and sniffing. Now at this point, I'm terrified. I'm trying to slowly back away from the edge of the cooler I'm on, so I can slip behind the wall the cooler backs up to and drop into the boiler room. I'm almost at the end of the cooler when I hear the morgue door slam open and break the tiles of the wall with the door handle. I'm less than 35 feet from whatever is panting and smelling like death, and all I can do is think, run, run, run. I could hear the sniffing, and then I heard the deepest, most menacing growl I'd ever heard. The movies and TV shows just don't do justice to how deep and rough a growl of this size sounds. It was sniffing me out. It was actually smelling where I'd been. I dropped down behind the wall in the boiler room, and I thank God the door that connected the morgue to it was blocked with old gurneys and a locker on its side, which I thought would stop the thing from getting in. I was wrong. So very wrong. I hadn't been in the boiler room 30 seconds before I heard the pounding scratching on the steel door. It sounded like Freddy Krueger himself was trying to carve his way through the door. Then I heard the sound that still haunts me to this day. It howled, and I mean it bellowed the howl so loud that I had to cover my ears. Now on the other side of the boiler room was access to the generator and the door trucks used to unload and the hillside that led to the woods. When I reached the other side of the room, I could hear those things slamming into the door and knocking the lockers away on the gurneys. I opened the door to the dock room, and when I looked back, I saw the arm of this creature sticking through the opening it had made. It was like a real-life horror movie. It was a gray and brown mass of fur, but it looked like a human arm, but it didn't because the hand was all wrong. The hand had 5 digits, but the claws would have made a bear run away in fear. I slammed the door behind me and ran for the dock doors. The dock doors wouldn't budge, and I could hear the gurneys overturning and lockers sliding on the floor. I was getting through, and the only thing between me and it was now a single door. I ran to the one window by the dock door and proceeded to bust it out, which mangled my hand from the glass. Then, as I was pulling myself through the window, I heard the door get slammed into, and one of the hinges completely flew off the door and hit the wall. I tumbled out of the window and hit the cold, wet ground. When I stood up, I saw it in the doorway. Now I'm 6'4" and 250 pounds. I'm not little by any means, and this thing took up the entire doorway. An 8-foot-tall, 3-foot-wide door. It was covered head to toe in gray-brown fur. It had a very narrow snout, almost like a Doberman pinscher. Its ears were barely visible because of the doorway, but I could tell that they were pointing up, just like a dog's. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was completely paralyzed. This thing was staring right into my soul, looking at every delicious part it was going to enjoy. I've never felt like an item on a menu, but I can tell you, it's terrifying. Then it snarled, and that woke me from my disbelief of what I was seeing. I turned and ran. I ran up the hill, into the woods to get around the hospital, to get back to the street where the car was parked. I hadn't made it 25 feet when I heard it clawing to get out of the window. I knew I would never make it to the car this way. So I ran back towards the hospital where the fire escape ladder was. I'd used the ladder before to climb to the roof to take pictures of the entire town. I completely skipped the first 3 rungs of the ladder and was now inside the closed part of the fire escape. Again, this thing howled, and I could feel the waves of pure terror filling my body. My hand was killing me at this point, and I was getting blood on everything, and just as I was reaching the first window I could climb into, this thing slammed into the fire escape ladder, knocking me down a couple rungs. It leaped onto the outside of the fire escape and began clawing at my feet. Just as I reached the window, I felt it. Pain. Nothing like anything I've ever felt. It grabbed just above my ankle and yanked, and doing so shredded my boot, the end of my jeans, and my flesh. I was able to pull myself into the first window. I heard it push itself off the fire escape and head back the way it came. Now at this point, I'm dragging my left leg, trying to keep my right hand in my hoodie pocket. The entrance we came in from was only about 150 feet away, down the main hall and around a left turn. As I'm halfway down the hall, I hear the steel doors slamming again. I'm dragging myself down the hall, just trying to stay focused on getting out of this nightmare, when the howling starts again, and this time I hear it getting closer. I make the turn and hear the pounding coming up the stairs in the basement. I make it to the entrance and hear the patting of hands and feet on the floor. I make the mistake of looking back just as it rounded the corner, and now is running on all fours just like a real dog. I bolted down the hill towards the street where the car was parked, and then I realized the car was gone. My friends had left me. My only escape was gone. I just zoned out and kept running down the hill. My leg was throbbing, my hand was in agony, and all I could think about was how I was about to become dog kibble. Finally, I made it to the first house I could find. I ran in and ran full force into the door and began pounding on it like a crazy person. And thank God this little old lady was home, because she opened the door, and I literally fell inside just before I kicked the door closed. Standing up on 2 legs at the end of her driveway was this monster. I broke down in tears. I didn't know what to do. Luckily, the old lady had called the cops, mostly because a crazy person who was bleeding everywhere just fell into her home. When the cops got there and asked me what happened, I told them the same thing I've said here, and of course they didn't believe me and thought I was under the influence of something. The EMTs took me to the hospital, and when they did blood work and found no substance in my system, they then concluded that I was attacked by a wild dog. I ended up with 36 stitches in my leg and 17 in my hand. I had to get rabies shots and tell the local wildlife officers my story. He informed me that they had reports of wild dog packs running around the town, outside, ransacking garbage cans and killing some local pets, and I informed him that it wasn't a pack of wild dogs. It was a giant werewolf, but they all just thought I was crazy. The only thing I had in my favor was the claw mark on my leg, and even the doctors were confused about how a wild dog could leave a scar like that. Now you know my story, and you know why I absolutely know we are not at the top of the food chain. I've never been back to Hazelwood Hospital, and I've deterred anyone from ever going there. That experience has haunted me for over the past 11 years of my life. It's made me into the overly cautious man I am today. I always have to know where every exit is when I walk into a building, and I always know where large clumps of woods are. This experience changed me forever, and it changed the way I look at the world we live in. Just because we haven't seen something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means some people haven't been hunted for their life. I have no doubt that what stalked me that night was the dog man. I know it in my bones.